continuing the session. I'm Marlon and I'm helping to moderate in support of Caroline and the panelists. So this session is going to continue on with discussions about how Indigenous-led efforts can strengthen connection to country, facilitate the passing of intergenerational knowledge, and empower communities. So for the remainder of the afternoon, we have 2 virtual presentations followed by a panel session. And so now I'd like to introduce Gillian Mayne, read her bio and then her title, and she'll start her presentation. So Gillian is the Director of Queensland Land Restoration Fund. She holds a Bachelor of Economics from University of Tasmania, followed by a Bachelor of Applied Science in Property Economics with distinction, and a Master of Business Administration in Leadership and Strategy from Queensland University of Technology. Prior to her role with Queensland Land Restoration Fund, she served as Executive Manager of Portfolio Services at CSIRO, Director at Department of State Development, and Queensland Regional Manager at the Australian Valuation Office. And her presentation title is Valuing Traditional Knowledge in Carbon Projects. So thank you very much, Gillian.
Thank you very much, Marlon, and I just wanted to say thank you for the invitation to present today. I'm really sorry that I'm not able to join you in Darwin. I hope you're really enjoying the conference today and yesterday. I am joining you from Brisbane, so I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm sitting today, which is the Yagara and Turrbal people, and also to acknowledge the traditional owners in the room today. We stand to learn a lot from your knowledge. What I'd like to talk to you about today is the Land Restoration Fund, and I'll just share my screen very quickly, get the presentation going. I wanted to talk to you about how we are valuing traditional knowledge in the Land Restoration Fund. So I'll give you a quick overview of the Land Restoration Fund's position in the carbon farming market, what we're trying to achieve in Queensland on behalf of the Queensland State Government, and how we're acknowledging and valuing traditional ecological knowledge within our program, and in particular our investments, and just to showcase a couple of projects that we've invested in to demonstrate how we are applying our principles into our investments. The Land Restoration Fund was established by the Queensland Government in 2017. It's a $500 million commitment from the Queensland State Government to develop carbon farming in Queensland. Queensland has the natural capital advantage across Australia. We have a large and diverse natural capital holding across Queensland, and including, really diverse landscapes and regions with a lot to offer in terms of carbon sequestration. So there's 2 ways that we in particular deliver on the fund's objectives. So the first is that we are investing in carbon farming projects across Queensland. So we do this by being a buyer in the voluntary market in the carbon space. I heard Anna mentioning previously about the various role of buyers in the market space, and we are one of those buyers in the voluntary market. And the second thing we're doing is we are working within the industry to try to increase the pipeline of projects that are coming through Queensland, so the supply of ACCUs into the marketplace, and really developing those opportunities for landholders to participate. So when we talk about investing through Land Restoration Fund projects, we are developing what we call an LRF premium carbon credit. So our projects must undertake carbon farming using a legislated carbon farming method. So they must be able to be registered with the Emissions Reduction Fund. But we limit the types of projects that we are investing into agricultural, vegetation and savannah burning methods, because we are trying to promote the land-based projects for environmental benefit. But the more unique thing that we're doing is we are valuing and investing in what we call co-benefits. So these are the additional benefits that flow from carbon farming projects. The types of benefits, the co-benefits that we value are employment opportunities. We value the restoration of Queensland's ecosystems, including the protection of threatened species, threatened ecosystems, benefits to the Great Barrier Reef. But beyond the environmental benefits, we also value the social and economic benefits of carbon farming projects. Some of these examples of these are we value the on-country business opportunities for First Nations people, and we also value employment that is derived from carbon farming projects in Queensland. By valuing these additional co-benefits, we are able to pay more than the average, the spot price of carbon at the moment, because we recognise that those additional benefits have a much greater benefit to the community than the carbon alone. So the types, just a little bit more detail on the types of co-benefits that we are investing in. So environmental benefits, there are quite a range of environmental co-benefits. These include healthier soils, coastal ecosystems, threatened species, so koalas, black cockatoo, anything that's on the endangered species list or threatened species list in Queensland is something that we value and include in our co-benefits. Social co-benefits are the social community resilience, connection to country and economic opportunities for First Nations people. And in the economic sphere, we are valuing adaptive practices for income diversity, the creation and maintenance of regional jobs, and regional industry development. The most important part about valuing these co-benefits is being able to provide confidence that these co-benefits are actually being delivered. And the reason that we see this as being important is that we feel that investors into carbon projects ultimately are really interested in the co-benefit outcomes, but really are looking for the same standard to be applied in regard to carbon projects that is applied to the carbon element of their projects through the Emissions Reduction Fund. And so we've developed Australia's first and probably even the world first co-benefit standard, which is the standard that's used to identify the types of co-benefits that we are valuing. It provides a standard for verifying and measuring those co-benefits as they come through. So the co-benefit standard links each co-benefit category to the types of carbon project that's being delivered. And it's a pretty detailed document in terms of how you can actually go about claiming those benefits and the standard that's required for each one of those. Considering that we're talking about First Nations co-benefits in particular today, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the First Nations co-benefits standards that's outlined in this document. So for the First Nations co-benefit to be claimed under this carbon farming project under the Land Restoration Fund, the project must take place on Indigenous land, including Aboriginal freehold land with native title determination, or land that's subject to a registered native title claim, or land where there's an Indigenous land use agreement in place. The alternative to this is that the project can be led by a prescribed body corporate, or can directly involve First Nations participants, such as through the provision of fire management services or Indigenous rangers who are managers of the project. So there's a range of ways that we acknowledge in traditional owner involvement in projects, and there's not one that's more valuable than another. But the most important thing is that we recognise the value of supporting projects that have traditional owner participation. In particular, we acknowledge that it provides great benefits to Queensland by supporting projects that both include existing Indigenous First Nations knowledge, ecological knowledge in particular, but also that we support and grow the capacity in the marketplace as well. The second First Nations co-benefit is a social and economic one. So, the social and economic co-benefits for the LRF are around relative socio-economic disadvantage, as stated by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So that's inclusive across the whole of Queensland, not just referencing First Nations. But we are looking at projects that train or upskill local workers, and that can be a huge benefit to First Nations communities, where you are looking to pass on your knowledge, that we can support the training and development of upcoming ecological managers. The third benefit is, the third co-benefit category is around environmental co-benefits. So projects that improve soil or native vegetation condition from a range of environmental assets, including wetlands, catchments, species and distributions. We acknowledge that First Nations ecological knowledge is incredibly important in that sphere as well. So when it comes to actually claiming First Nations co-benefits under the Land Restoration Fund, we seek to ensure that important co-benefits that carbon farming projects can support or provide for First Nations people are recognised and valued. So we acknowledge that the benefits that flow to the First Nations people from on-country business opportunities and new service delivery businesses, as well as supporting cultural and customary connections, is recognised in our standard. LRF carbon farming projects present an opportunity for First Nations people to earn new sources of income, embed their traditional knowledge and develop unique skills through carbon farming. Two types of scenarios are identified as eligible for claiming First Nations co-benefits. I touched on these before, but it's around location and then participation. So First Nations Indigenous land projects that are based on location, as I mentioned before, taking place on Aboriginal freehold land or land with native title determination, or land that's subject to a registered native title claim, or land where there's an ILUA in place. Just as an aside, when we, one of the activities that we undertake in terms of supporting Indigenous knowledge to be incorporated into carbon farming is in the research and development part of our program. So we have both an investment and a research and development arm. In terms of the research and development, one of the activities that we've been supporting in the last 12 months is the development of a best practice template for Indigenous land use agreements to be developed for carbon farming. We recognise that this is an important and growing need, and the standardisation or incorporation or templating of those types of agreements isn't necessarily possible to have one single template, but what is important is that we aid in the development of the ILUAs to reduce costs and time by providing best practice guidance. So we're working with a number of traditional owner groups to try to support them in developing that for themselves. The second type of co-benefit that we recognise in terms of Indigenous people is the Indigenous carbon based on participation. So these are projects where the project owners are First Nations people, or the project directly involves First Nations participation, such as through the provision of fire management services or Indigenous rangers, or where Indigenous rangers are the managers of the project. So co-benefits can also arise from a combination of both location and participation, so it's not one or the other. The best projects for us are really ones that cross all co-benefits, so environmental, social, economic, and in terms of First Nations, both location and participation. The ways in which co-benefits can be recorded can differ from community to community. We recognise that there are lots of different ways that Indigenous peoples see and recognise their own benefits. And so we try to be flexible in the way that we allow for the verification of those outcomes, noting that verification is an incredibly important part of the Land Restoration Fund, and what we're trying to achieve is that standard that gives investors lots of confidence that the benefits are actually being delivered, which is only to the benefit of all communities for us to do that. What we have committed to do is to ensuring that First Nations voices shape the policy, and that the policy that materially affects them. So we've developed the co-benefit standard. We have sought engagement with representatives from First Nations groups. We always recognise that we can do better, and we are always welcoming new input into the development of these documents. So according to the Land Restoration Fund Co-Benefit Standard, assurance can be done by the proponent, and the standards are set out in the standard. What we do require is evidence of linkages to First Nations people. It could be in the form of photographic evidence of Indigenous participation, a statement that the project contributes to achieving the priorities of healthy country plans, or maybe statements by First Nations beneficiaries about the project benefits for the community. Evidence that funding is going to Indigenous community and cultural benefits associated with delivering a project. So it's really just that documentation and assurance that the benefits are flowing where they've been claimed. Land Restoration Fund projects can be delivered and developed by a range of people. They can be developed and delivered by the landholders themselves, by carbon service providers, by maybe a third-party broker. There are a range of ways that they can be delivered. What's important to us is that the benefits actually flow back to the communities that are delivering the carbon in the first place. So the ways that I've outlined before are really ways that proponents themselves can assure the outcomes from their projects. The alternative is that they can adopt the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation's core benefit verification framework. This is what we call third-party assurance, and we find that framework, we've supported the development of that framework over time. We're supporting the improvement of that framework in terms of capacity ease of verification processes, and we think it's a good standard for First Nations benefits to be verified against, given that it's developed by First Nations people and is peer assured within the framework. So in 2020, we delivered our first investment round. So through commitment to investment in projects, we offered $100 million to the marketplace. For Queensland-based only projects, there are eligibility criteria for receiving, for contracting through the Land Restoration Fund. We've got a total of 18 projects that are under contract, to a total of $92.5 million across 15-year contracts. So they've got a long way to go, and they've really only just started. Those projects cover about 1.8 million hectares of land. Carbon estimation areas are smaller than that. That's just the areas that have been identified as the carbon estimation areas being involved in. But most importantly, you can see down the bottom the co-benefit classes that we've been able to support via these projects. In terms of First Nations participation, 6 out of the 18 projects, so a third of the projects, have incorporated First Nations participation. and 5 of the projects are First Nations location co-benefit outcomes, which we think is really a great outcome from the first round. We really welcome projects that include these co-benefits. We are seeking diversification of those. We've certainly supported a number of savannah burning projects, which we're proud to support. We'd really like to see Indigenous involvement in the whole range of carbon farming methods across Queensland. So we're looking for ways to support that.
Just give you a 2-minute warning.
Thank you so much. That's good timing. So I've just got a couple of projects that I'd like to highlight that we supported in our first investment round. So the first one is a savannah burning project, obviously located in far north Queensland in the Cape. This project is quite a large project, so we're providing around $8.5 million in projects that it's a collaboration between the Queensland Government, obviously through the Land Restoration Fund, and APN Cape York. This project, interestingly enough, uses both savannah burning methods. So there are 2 savannah burning methods, one of which has a large level of take up, and the second one includes some restoration as well. And we're proud to say that we're one of the first purchasers supporting the projects that include restoration. So the project, as savannah burning methods do, aims to deliver emissions avoidance. But really for us, the most important part of it is the co-benefits that relate to project building skills, opportunities, socioeconomic resilience of the community. They'll employ local Indigenous project ranges that will support the connection to ancestral homes. And the project will also provide an income source to support the building of community infrastructure such as communication towers. That whilst that's not a direct co-benefit, we recognise that that's a really important opportunity in the Cape. The second project I'd like to highlight is one that we have funded through the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation on Mimosa Station. I wanted to highlight this project because it is an example of a project that's not savannah burning, but it produces really great co-benefits for First Nations people as well. So it's currently a cattle grazing property, and the project will put 160 hectares of environmental plantings to reinstate riparian vegetation. So this is really about improving management of the property to build up the environmental capital into the property. The project will be activities that will be undertaken by the lessee and will build on existing land management skills. Again, it's supporting capacity building, training and employment in re-veg. This one's, a really great example of how carbon farming projects can build capability and capacity in the marketplace. And just to finish off, again, I'd like to say thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share our program with you. We think it's a really exciting and innovative step forward in the carbon farming market. We'd invite you to connect with us on our website. You can link to us and follow what we're doing as we develop the program. And as I said before, we're really interested in learning more about how we can connect with First Nations people to improve our program, and would be really willing to seek feedback, particularly in our co-benefit standard, about how we can make improvements. Thanks again for letting me present to you today, and I look forward to taking some questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time for just like one burning question if someone wants to ask a question quickly to the floor. Does anyone have a question for Gillian? Yep, we have one question. Is that okay, Gillian, if you take that now?
Yes. Yes, certainly.
Oh, thank you, Gillian.
It's a little bit. Oh, thank you.
Can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
Yes, okay. So in your talk, you mentioned that you only accept projects that have those approved methods. Are those the methods that have been approved under the Emissions Reduction Fund? And then given that, are you open to accept new methods where integration of traditional ecological knowledge can demonstrate that that method can also sequester carbon as a carbon project?
We are willing to consider where the program goes to next. The methods that we prioritise at the moment are land-based methods, and it's probably unlikely that we would move away from those methods simply for the fact that the co-benefits that we value in terms of the environment predominantly come from those carbon projects. The program is run from the Department of Environment and Science in Queensland, and so the environmental co-benefits are a key priority for the program. We're really looking to restore and maintain vegetation in landscapes. And so, yeah, methods that continue to do that, that are developed in the future, we would certainly consider incorporating into the program.
Okay, thanks.